Hello, I'm Liz Lumley of Finextra, and today I'm speaking to Kenneth Yu of SunGard, and we're going to have a talk about risk management and specifically stress testing. So what are some of the key stress testing milestones that U.S. banks are facing this year?
So in the DFAST $10 billion to $50 billion range, the key milestones this year is really at the end of March. They have the submission deadline for their first DFAST, Dodd-Frank stress testing required. Later this year, of course, they're going to get a lot of regulatory feedback. They're going to be making updates to their stress testing process and then do another run at the end of the year when the regulators are going to release their scenarios on November 15th. I think probably the next step in the horizon, which is a big one for the DFAST 10 to 50 banks, is the required public disclosures that first happened in June of 2015. So that's something to look forward to for next year as well.
So how have U.S. banks been dealing with this regulatory discipline so far, and how do you expect it to be in the near future?
So different banks have been dealing with this challenge in different ways. Depending on their size, complexity, exposures, balance sheet components. But I would say, as of today, for the DFAST 10 to 50 banks, best practice is really taking a holistic, comprehensive look at all of the risk exposures across the entire organization's balance sheet. So this, of course, includes credit risk, which has received a lot of the focus recently, but also components of pre-provision net revenue, PPNR. So non-interest income, non-interest expense, also allowance for loan and lease losses, as well as obviously ultimate impact on net income and capital ratios. So I feel like in the immediate future, a lot of banks are going to be moving towards this best practice, towards this more holistic view, towards their balance sheet and the impacts of macroeconomic stresses on the different risks across that balance sheet.
So are you seeing banks strategically re-engineer their operations and culture in order to embed stress testing into their operations?
So I think most bankers know what they need to do to embed stress testing or holistic stress testing into their risk management practices. But in reality, I think this is an evolutionary process, which is going to take a lot more time to really perfect. So getting to that ultimate end goal requires banks to break down organizational silos, collect a lot of internal data, develop a lot of sophisticated methodologies, and really put in place a governance structure to oversee all the processes and models. And that's really a very different perspective on the risk management practice that a lot of banks have not been doing so far or have not been developing their risk management infrastructure to handle. And that's going to take some time.
So to finish our conversation, I'm just wondering whether, what are you seeing in the future? What are some of the interesting observations you can make about the current stress testing landscape in the U.S.?
So I think a lot of practitioners view stress testing as a regulatory burden right now, which is understandable because this is the first time a lot of these banks have to go through this process. And it requires a lot of resources, a lot of investment, a lot of time to run these stress tests, which is why I think in the future, what we're hoping as an industry to move towards is a way to run these stress tests on a more automated manner so that you could spend less time actually figuring out what the numbers are and asking questions regarding whether the numbers are correct, and rather spending more time focusing on drawing insights from the results. So those insights could be concentration risks, setting portfolio limits, informing your capital plan, informing your budgeting and forecasting processes using the stress testing results, and ultimately just getting a much better idea of a forward-looking view of risk that faces your organization under macroeconomic stresses. And especially going through the most recent financial crisis, I think this is a very important component of risk management at banks, and something that the banking industry has admittedly not done very well in the past in terms of having that forward-looking view of risk. And that's why I think stress testing should really be moving from a regulatory compliance exercise towards a best practice, normal business activity that all banks should practice on their own.
It goes back to that question about culture, moving it from a regulatory burden into a normal way of doing business.
Exactly. And it requires not only a cultural shift in thinking in terms of breaking down those banking silos and having different departments within the bank talk to each other, but also requires data infrastructure, models, software to help get that bank to that ultimate goal, which is why, going back to the evolutionary process, I think that's going to take some time to get to that ultimate goal.
So, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.